Welcome to the Wedding Wisdom Series. This series is for couples planning their wedding. There are tips that are going to be for planning your wedding. There are going to be tips for things that you should avoid. This is going to be a series that we're going to do on a regular basis, and each week will be a little bit different and have a different aspect of the planning for you. I hope this helps as you make your decisions. By the way, I'm Sandra Schuff, the owner of Lavender Manor Weddings and Events. I'm a wedding planner and a wedding venue owner both. Been doing weddings most of my life. We'll see you in the next video. Choosing your ceremony time, because it's a very important thing to choose. Your ceremony time is going to indicate how the flow of your entire wedding day goes, from lighting to photography, the comfort of your guests, when you're going to start your hair and makeup. It's going to actually impact the entire flow of your wedding day. So most couples want to choose that time first. And sometimes you're required to for your contract. So what I'm going to show you is how a professional approaches it, and it's a bit different than how you might think it would be. So here's what actually goes into it. There's a difference if it's an outdoor ceremony or if it's an indoor ceremony. If it's an outdoor ceremony, you're going to be wanting to, in particular for some of the pictures, avoid your harsh midday sun, or there needs to be a place where there's a shaded area with the right lighting for your photographer for some of those pictures. So consider some shade direction and that kind of thing. Like we have a willow tree that people love to take pictures in front of. That helps a lot. It makes the lighting perfect. But there's lots of options at any venue for that. You want to be aware of wind and sound if you have a videographer in particular. Wind as far as if you're going to have a part of the ceremony that it might disturb that. The other thing is you're going to want to think about your guest comfort. So when you're choosing your time of day, you really don't in July want to have your ceremony at 3 p.m. That is going to be a miserable time for your guests. And so those are things to consider. And so that's where a wedding planner can help you through all of those things. They know the area, they know the venue, they know the weather, they know what the timeline is going to look like overall. So they're really going to be able to help you with that. Outdoor, we talked about golden hour, right? I think we've covered that enough, but that also is part of that as well. So if you have an indoor ceremony, you have a lot more flexibility on your timing. So I will say if it's going to be a winter wedding, sometimes it might feel a little bit darker, artificial lighting. Sometimes the lighting, your photographer is going to want to know if it's LED or if it's incandescent. Those things all impact all of it. Some venues also might have set blocks of times for things that you don't get to have a decision making in, or set access times. They all have that because they have to do their side of things before you arrive and after you leave. And then also noise curfews. Those are all things that are all going to come into your timing. County ordinances. There's a lot that goes into it. So our next subject. First thing I want to know when I'm scheduling a timeline for a couple is, are you planning to have a first look? So first, a lot of people don't know what a first look is. Most people these days do, but for those that don't, a first look means that we usually place the groom in a special place that's very picturesque for the photos, and then we bring the bride in and she taps him on the shoulder and he gets to see her in her wedding dress in a private moment. I'm actually going to call it semi-private because usually I'm there to help make sure all the details are in place. Her dress is laying right, his tux isn't sticking out weird and the collar or something like that. And the photographer, and if you have a videographer, they'll be there too. So, but it's pretty much between the two of you. You ignore the rest of us. But what's important about that time is if you do that ahead of time, instead of waiting until you are seen at the first, going down the aisle. Now, I also will say there's also something called the first touch, where we can put you on the corner of the building and you can hold hands. Usually a couple will read something to each other. It's quite a special moment also. So there's a first look, there's a first touch, or first down the aisle. Those are the three options. So when you're doing a first look, what that does is it allows time for you to have your portraits done as a couple ahead of time, with your bridal party, with your immediate family. And we usually schedule each to come at the right time, so they're not just waiting for you all the time, and you can just relax and enjoy that moment. So It does allow for a shorter photo time after the ceremony, so your guests aren't waiting for you as long. So there's a real benefit to it. It's a little more relaxed pace too. You're not having to rush because you're worrying about the guests, waiting on you or leaving. Sometimes I've had that happen. So the other option is not having a first look. So a first look, all your portraits are done afterwards. So you need a longer cocktail time. I highly advise that if you're going to do that, that you provide appetizers. If you're serving alcohol, that would be available. Your non-alcohol beverages. Potentially you could have yard games, things to keep people there and entertained and happy and visiting with each other, interacting while you're getting your pictures taken. Because that can take quite a bit of time, especially if you have a large family, you're going to need to allow extra time for that. So the other thing is when it's time for those sunset photos towards the end of the evening as a couple, you're going to have more time for reception and for the sunset photos if you do a first look. So our couples, it's probably about 60-40 right now. About 60% of them are doing a first look, and probably another 10% are doing a first touch, and the rest are doing down the aisle the traditional way. So this next question is actually a thing that we need to look at is something I mentioned a little bit, is your guest experience. So you're going to ask yourself a few questions. Will the guests be in direct sun? Because one thing you don't want to do is have them facing the sun, because they can't even see you. They're squinting. They can't enjoy it. Are there elderly guests attending? Are there shade areas for your guests to wait in before going into the ceremony area if they show up early? Are children attending? How long will they be seated? Is there travel in between ceremony and reception? Because a lot of people will get married at their church and then travel to the venue for their reception. So what is that time frame going to look like? How much time do your guests need to get from point A to point B? Your time on your timeline is going to impact all your vendors. So like, what time is your hair and makeup going to start? Your photography coverage, your catering timeline, all your DJ cues and photography cues and all that kind of thing is going to come from the day of coordinator. She's going to be making sure that flow works with everyone. But the other thing about timeline and temperature could be how it impacts your florals and how long they're going to last. It's going to impact your transportation schedule, for example. So if you're having a 2 p.m. ceremony, it could mean that your hair needs to start at 6 a.m. It all depends on how many people are getting hair and makeup done. If it's just you and maybe your moms, or if it's just you and all of your bridal party. All of those things come into play, and you really need to take time with your coordinator, work through that, or your planner. So not all ceremonies are 20 minutes long, by the way. So it's based on the tradition of the culture of the couple getting married. So we have some cultural weddings here that do last for an hour and a half of ceremony time. So we have to work through that timeline a little more closely. And there are some things usually in those that are eliminated, that they don't participate in. So it all works out that way, but it's a consideration. Those things are tradition based. They require specific start times. Sometimes they do their pictures off site. So those are all things that we take into consideration when creating a timeline. So a reception timeline has to reflect that. So as we were talking about the potential for being off site or not, so if your ceremony and reception are separate, you not only need to consider the driving time, but parking time, the guest transition as they all arrive and they get settled in, that kind of thing. Traffic, perhaps. What time of day is that traffic going to be traveling, and what's that like in your area? Weather delays could also come into play. So the big important thing about that is always put in a little bit of buffer time. So there's not always a lot of buffer time available, but it's still doable. All right, so the next thing is the theme and the mood that you're looking for can be also impacted by the timeline. And so if you do a morning wedding, sometimes that gives you a different glow of the day, and it's also a little more intimate. It's usually a little softer, a little more relaxed, a little bit of something to consider in that you might have a little bit more unpredictable weather. So depending on where you are, like here, May ends up being really beautiful, but if we're gonna have some rain, it might be a couple of times in June. So you just have to, you can't always depend on knowing what that's going to be. So that's why we have backup plans. If you do an afternoon, that balances the elegance, you know, because you start out in the daytime, you get all the major things taken care of, and then you just go roll right into the evening light at the end of the reception. It's very special that way too. Evening weddings can be very dramatic. They can be very glamorous, and they can be high energy celebrations as well. So we even have a wedding that they want to have the lights in the willow tree for the ceremony. So they're actually doing the dinner reception first, going to do the ceremony last. She walks down the aisle right just before sunset during the golden hour, and the lights in the willow tree light up during the ceremony. So lots and lots of ways to look at everything. Your ceremony time does set the tone and the time for those emotional events that you want to consider. So our next subject that's going to impact when you schedule your ceremony time is going to be the time of year it is, the temperature that it is. Those things really do also have to be factored in. So in summertime, like I just mentioned, in July, you're going to avoid the hottest part of the day for the sake of your guests, but also for you. You are in wedding clothes. You're not going to want to be sweating while you're standing up there and being miserable and uncomfortable. You want to enjoy every single moment. Also in summertime, the sun sets later, so you take that into account as well as your guests' comfort. In wintertime, it's an earlier sunset time, and so like 4:30 or 5, or some places 3:30. Temperature affects your florals, your makeup, your ceremony length, and a lot of other things. So your ceremony might need to be earlier than you think it's going to be, or what you would like for it to be. Spring and fall are both beautiful. They're a beautiful balance of that time frame. So like May and early June are beautiful times as far as timing goes, as well as when you get into the end of September, 1st of October. So it's a little bit different than it would be the rest of the time. Okay, so now since we've mentioned sunset photos, which are also called golden hours, and it's when the sun has that golden touch to it, and it's very romantic and beautiful. We want to find out what time that is. So I go online and I find out exactly what time sunset's going to be on that date. You can look at any year and know what that time is. And so we check that out. Very seldom is there anyone who doesn't care about that, but most people do. So it's an important thing to look into first. And then once we do that, you also have to determine what we call cocktail hour, which doesn't necessarily mean you're having cocktails. It's just a time when there can be beverages available, alcohol, non-alcohol, doesn't matter, appetizers, like I said, the game possibility. So, are you going to do 30 minutes for that? Do you need 45 minutes? Some people, it's 15 minutes. It just depends on how we're setting out the rest of the timeline. So that's something to discuss. So after we determine those two things, we get the golden hour photo time in, the family photo time in. How long is the ceremony going to be? Most ceremonies are about 20 to 30 minutes, although we're going to get into different ethnic type weddings, and sometimes those are much longer, and we'll get into that later. But we're going to determine what time your guest arrival is going to be, what that window is going to be. I also always build in a little bit of buffer, because when I look at a timeline, it's a guideline, and I always remind my couples that. It's not a military clock type of a timeline. It is absolutely a guideline, because you have to go with the flow on a wedding day. So, for example, if your sunset, let's say it's closer to winter time and it's 6:15, then you're not going to be able to have your wedding at 5:30 and be able to do all the things you do in between, especially like meal time and introductions and cutting the cake and all those things. Those other times that we just talked about are going to be really important. Okay, so now that we've covered things to consider that are positive things, let's talk about the things that are common mistakes when planning when your wedding ceremony should be in your timeline. Picking a ceremony time before checking on sunset. You'd want to be careful about that. Starting too early in extreme summer heat. Forgetting early winter sunsets. Not putting in a built-in buffer. That's really important. And also not being flexible on your time. Okay, underestimating your family photo time, forgetting travel time, not confirming your venue restrictions. Those are all things that could really impact your timeline in a negative way, to be honest. So overlapping with major sporting events, something to consider as well. Pushing dinner too late unintentionally. Boy, when you do that, or if you don't start dinner on time, it really impacts your caterer and the food quality that you get. Having no weather contingency plan, those are all things that you want to avoid. Those are mistakes that people make. And this is when you have a wedding planner, wedding coordinator to manage your day for you, then you're really better off for that, because those are the things they're going to avoid and you don't even have to think about it. You just get to enjoy your day. So a final thought here is your ceremony time isn't just a number on an invitation. It affects lighting, photos, comfort, vendor flow, energy, everything. And when it's planned strategically, the entire day feels very effortless. So here's a smart planning tip for you. Choose a wedding venue that includes a wedding planner and a wedding coordinator. It often saves you money. Okay, that's all for this particular video. Stay tuned for our next subject coming soon.